So first thing first, we're going to go to the Google Cloud platforms and click on the first one. And then we're going to go to the console. And the first thing you want to do is actually create a project, right? So we're going to create a new project and we're going to call it Yummy. Good. Create. After you've created your project, the second thing you want to do to actually use any Google Cloud Platform API is to set up your billing. So head over to the menu here and then billing, and then link a billing account. And because I do not have a billing account yet, you're going to have to go ahead and create a billing account. So after we have created our project, we have enabled billing. The next thing we're going to do is go to the APIs and services. And then we're going to search for metrics. So with just a quick Google search, you can find the documentation for the distance metric. So you're going to press on this. And actually what we're interested in is the getting started. So this one. And you can see we've already created our project. We've given it a name. We've enabled the billing account. And then now we need to enable the API, right? Or the API that you're going to use, because Google is actually packed with tons and tons of APIs. So we're going to go back and click on this one. And because I've actually used this before, it's already enabled. But in your case, you're going to need to click on enable. And once this is enabled, let's see what is our next step. So let's go back. And we're going to see that after setting our Google Cloud project, we must then create and secure our API key. So we're going to go back to the console and then API and services and then select credentials. All right, we're just going to create a new one, and this is going to be an API key. And this is our generated API key. I'm just going to name it, really. And change this to Yummy API. Save. Cool. We're going to go back to our documentation and go to get started. So this is the URL that we're going to be using for our API, and it has a get method, meaning we're getting something from Google. And this looks like a normal URL with the name of the specific API that we are using right here. And then the data is coming back as JSON. But it looks like we need to pass in the origins, right? So in this case, like the origin is Washington. And then the destination is New York. Then we have the units, which comes in imperial. And finally, our API key. Cool. Let's copy this. So first thing first, we're going to copy the base URL and go back to FlutterFlow. And in the navigation menu right here, we're going to select this API calls. So we have two ways of creating API. You can create a group. Let's say we are using Google Maps, right? And Google has a lot of APIs. And sometimes we're going to need our API key. So you can create a group and actually define like the base URL, and then define like the key that you're going to be using. And then every other API that you're going to be using is going to inherit whatever we defined here, right? And then the other way is just creating a normal API. And this is what we're going to be using. So I'm going to call this API travel time. And it's a get method. And then I'm going to paste the URL here. Great. Now, as you can see in the documentation, we have some parameters. So first one going to be origin. So I'm going to copy that and then paste it here. So here in query parameters, add a new query. So I'm going to call this origin. And for now, I'm going to say specific value. I'll change this later. Then this is going to be a string. And I can just say Washington, if that's how we write Washington. Washington DC. And then the second one is destinations. Good. And this is going to be a string as well. And this is going to be New York. Okay. Third one is the unit. So I'm going to copy this as well. And string, say imperial. And last but not least, we have the key. So this is the API key that we just created. So I'm going to paste this here, specific value. This is a string as well. And then I'm going to go back and copy it. So show key, copy, and then paste it. All right, this is looking good. We're going to go to response and test to actually test if we're getting the data we need. And you actually have a preview of your URL here. And as you can see, we're passing in the origins and destination and our unit and the API key. Good, let's test this. Great. So you can see telling us the distance actually in kilometers and then the duration. So this is gonna take about 3 hours 51 minutes. Good. Now, how do we pass in our own origins and destination instead of actually hard coding in the values the way we did here? So here we can just say, instead of specific value, we can say from variable, but it's going to ask us to create a variable. So we're going to go back and show you how you can do this. So here you have headers, query parameters, and then variable. So if you go here, you can say, okay, you can name it origins, and this is going to be a string, and it's not a list, and you can just paste in a default value. But this we're actually not going to use, but you know, it's always important to have a default value. The second variable going to be named destination. My bad. Destination. And this is going to be a string as well. And by default, you can say New York. Okay, good. So if we go back to query parameters, and you might notice that actually the key is always going to be the same thing. So you can leave this as specific. The unit as well, you can leave it really as specific value. So here in origins, we're going to change this from specific to from variable. And then we're going to set the variable that we just created. Same thing for destination, from variable, and then destination. So I'm going to go back to response and test. And because I actually have some default values, it's still going to be Washington and New York. But if I change this to say includes, then it's going to ask me to define the value here. So I can say same thing, Washington DC and New York. Okay, good. Test, and it's giving me the same result. Okay, cool. Now, how do I use whatever is in here in my application? Because I actually don't need like the status, because I'm not going to use that. I'm also not going to use like these values right here or the distance really. And the one that I'm interested in is actually this one. So the duration. And how can I tap into this? Well, I can see that it's turning a row, right? And inside this row, we actually have elements. And inside elements, we now have distance and we have duration. And inside the duration, we have this text right here and value. And the text is now giving me the actual duration. And this is actually a lot of headache. FlutterFlow has an easier way. So if you scroll down, based on everything that you're getting here, FlutterFlow is actually suggesting JSON path for you. So we have rows. If you select the rows, then you're going to get everything. If you select rows, then elements, then you're going to get everything inside the element. But what we're looking for is actually just this, right? The 3 hours 50 minutes. So meaning we're going to select rows. Inside the rows, we're going to get the elements. Inside elements, we're getting the duration, and then finally text. So you can just add this JSON path and scroll up, and then we can name it. So you can say duration. Cool. And then don't forget to save. Okay, cool. So now, how do we bind this to our UI? Well, let's go back to the app. And you might think, well, I already have the API call, right? So I can just go ahead and actually add it here. But you actually don't have that option right here. And that's because first you need to add the backend query. So you need to call the API. So add query, select, instead of query collection, this time we're going to select API call, and then select the API we've just created. And the two variables, the destinations and origins, we're going to add those a little bit later on. Press confirm. Now, if we go back, now we should have the response, right? So travel time response. Select that. And then predefined path. It's going to give us the ability to actually select the duration or the name of the path we selected. Good. We can add a default variable because this is a text, duration here. Confirm. All right, let's test this. Good, this seems to be working. Now, because the API actually requires us to pass in the parameter values as strings and not coordinates, right? Because the origin is a string and destination also a string. This means we cannot pass in the coordinates or like the restaurant's address because this is a coordinate, right? So we can go ahead and create an additional field and call this like address in text, and this is gonna be a string. And on users, you can say address text as well, and define this as a string, right? Then I can just edit this, and I can edit the user's address. So let's say 410 Steve Biko, Pretoria, and save. And then I can go to the restaurants and edit this as well. So I can say, I don't know, any address, maybe Grosvenor Street. Save that. The other address I can say maybe 669, I don't know, Stanza Bupape. Save that. The third one, I don't know, I can just add any address, maybe Hilda Street, and save. Okay, cool. Now let's pass in the restaurant address and the user address as parameters. So let's go back to the app, and on the backend query, actually, we're going to edit this and pass in the parameters. So the first one going to be the origin. So you can say this is the restaurant address text, the one we just created. And then second one, destination. And you can say this is the current user or authenticated user address. Let me just find it. Cool. Confirm. All right, let's go ahead and test this. Instant reload. Great. So you can see that I'm 13 minutes away from this Nando's, 8 minutes from this one, and 12 from this one. Good. So that's how easy it is to actually set up API calls in FlutterFlow.